Hello everyone and welcome back to Lotus Premier Education. My name is Amanda and I want to be your college tutor. Today we're going to be talking about a super important part of the college admissions process, and that is continued interest letters. So if you're watching this video, this might not be your favorite time of the year. If you're watching this video, you likely were deferred from at least one of your schools. And I just want to stop for a second and say both congratulations and I'm sorry. I know that deferrals are not the answer that you were hoping for. And of course, the other piece of a deferral means that the college process is still going for you. But you should remember that a deferral is not a rejection. And that's why you also want to think about congratulations. You are still in the game. And that means the college process is still going for you. So you have to put in just as much effort in this round as you did right at the beginning. Now, one of the best ways to continue to show effort after a deferral is through what we call a continued interest letter. A continued interest letter is a very long-form interest letter to show a school that you are still interested in attending, just as interested as you were when you first applied, and also to update them on the exciting things that have happened since you sent in that application. But there are a few really big things to remember about continued interest letters. And if you do a continued interest letter wrong, it could hurt your chances of admissions. So let's get into it. Number one, when you are deferred from a school, you need to actually read what is in the deferral packet. So there are some schools that will actually ask you not to send a continued interest letter. Before you sit down on your Google Doc and start heftily researching your schools again, please check whether or not your school actually wants a continued interest letter. If they ask you not to send any other material specifically, you should not override that. So number one, pay attention to what they're actually looking for. Number two, kind of along these similar lines, some schools will actually give you instructions for the continued interest letter. So a famous example is UMichigan. They ask for a 250-word continued interest statement. Other schools will let you send your own version of a continued interest letter. And pro tip, most continued interest letters are longer than 250 words, which is why you really want to pay attention to whether or not the school has given you a guideline for the continued interest letter or whether it is up to you. Now, along that very important point, if a school has given you a guideline for a continued interest letter, they've also probably given you a due date, which you really need to pay attention to. If you miss a due date for a continued interest letter, it looks really bad and it's really hard to recover from. So just make sure that you're getting continued interest letters in on time. Now, once you have done step one and step two, and you've seen what exactly your school is asking for you, you're probably going to be in a larger boat of students which have an instruction that they can send additional materials, but they don't really know what to send. Well, that's where we come in. We're going to tell you exactly what you should send in your continued interest letter. So, one thing to keep in mind, you only get one shot at a continued interest letter. In case you didn't hear me, I'm going to say it one more time. You get one shot at a continued interest letter. And what that means is you need to take your time and make sure that it is well written, and you also need to time when you send it in. So something that we see pretty frequently is students rushing to send in a continued interest letter as soon as they're deferred. That is not beneficial. Do you want to take a second and guess why? It's not beneficial because it looks reactionary. When we receive news that we are not hoping for, our immediate response is to react. Your continued interest letter should show the school that your decision is really well thought out and that you spent some time thinking about it, and yes, you still want to attend. So number one, make sure you really time your continued interest letter well. When should it be sent, you may be wondering? I always recommend that you send a continued interest letter after schools are back in session after winter break. So many of the deferrals that students will hear will come in somewhere between the beginning of December and mid-December. you want to let the admissions officers breathe, go on their merry way for the holiday breaks, come back and restart, and then you send the letter. What happens if you send a letter too early? It could get completely stuck in the pile of letters that came in over the holiday break, and it will be harder for admissions to read and actually spend significant time on. The other thing that could happen if you send a continued interest letter too early is you may not have enough significant updates. Part of the continued interest letter is not just showing that you still want to go to a school, but also updating that school on some of the amazing things that you've been working on. And if you don't have enough time to actually produce something new, your continued interest letter will be weaker. So for schools that you've heard back from in early to mid-late December, a great time to send them in would be somewhere around mid-January. I like to say the sweet spot is around January 15th to 20th. But of course, you always need to pay attention to each school's deadline. So for example, that might be too late for some schools whose regular decisions come out in February. The other thing is that there's a whole new wave of early action schools that start releasing their decisions in mid-January. So you just want to make sure that you time it correctly. If you have any questions about when exactly to send your continued interest letter, you should ask your school counselor or an independent counselor that you've hired who's helping you through your process. Now, after you focus on when to send in the letter, the next big question arises, and that is, what should my continued interest letter say? Part of why this part of the process is so stressful for students is because you just finished an 8-month period where you were answering prompts. You were answering questions specifically and you had a specific word count. And now suddenly someone tells you to just send a letter to admissions. Well, we have a pretty clear format for you guys to follow, and here's how it goes. You want to start your continued interest letter by addressing it to your regional admissions officer and copying the general admissions office. Why do you think that is? Number one, sometimes students make a mistake on who their regional admissions officer is. So in case it falls in the wrong hands, you've copied the general admissions office. Number two, sometimes regional admissions officers are just really busy and they can't get back to you in time. So copying the general admissions office will make sure that it's uploaded correctly to your file. In addition to addressing the letter to your regional admissions officer and copying the general admissions office, you want to make sure that you upload your file or your continued interest letter to every school's portal that you can. So when you have an admissions portal, there's usually going to be a section that says upload new materials, and sometimes they'll even have a category for updates. You should always upload the letter to the portal when possible. If you don't worry. Usually the general admissions email will respond to you and say that they're uploading it on your behalf. Then the first paragraph should be your statement of intent. This is a continued interest letter. It's also sometimes referred to as a letter of intent. So you want to make sure that the first thing the admissions officer is reading is what exactly you're trying to say, which is, I still want to come to your school and I still think I'm a great fit. So some things you want to include in that introductory paragraph. Number one, tell them who you are. Even if you've already been communicating, this is a great time to remind them of your name, your school, your region. Number two, let them know you are deferred and keep it positive. You're deferred and you are still grateful to be considered. This is not a section where we want to let some of our negative feelings about deferral come through. After that, you want to let them know that you are still interested in their school, and you do want to be clear about how interested you are. So let's say that this school is still your first choice school, and because of that, you are not applying early decision 2 anywhere else. You should say that in almost exactly those words. This is still my first choice, and thus I am not applying early decision 2 to any other schools. Now, let's say it's still a top choice, but you're not quite sure how top. Or let's say it's still a top choice, but due to your college application strategy, you are applying somewhere early decision 2. Then just keep your language a little bit more vague, such as, this school remains a top choice for me, and I'd be honored to attend. And then give a couple of reasons why. So that is your intro paragraph. Then you want a paragraph about how you have continued showing interest in the school. This is a continued interest letter. So I would recommend that you make sure to update them on any conversations you've had with alumni or professors or admissions officers, any events that you've attended through the school. It could have been a college fair, it could have been an admissions talk at your school, it could have been an open house on campus, but just any events, virtual or in person, that you've attended for that school. You should also update them on what you've learned through their social channels. These schools spend a lot of time and effort updating their YouTubes, updating their Instagrams, updating their websites, so you just want to make sure to let them know that you've been paying attention. So body paragraph 1 is all about your interest. How have you continued showing interest in the school? Body paragraph 2 is going to be about your academic updates. Remember, at the end of the day, the schools really do care about your academics, and they are transcript first. So what that means is if you have grades to explain, this is the place to do it. If you have grades you want to highlight, this is also the place to do it. What classes have you really shown in? What grades came back that you're really proud of? This would be a great place to highlight them. Also, often around the time of the continued interest letters, students are receiving quarter 2 grades, first trimester grades, or first semester grades. And so this is a great place to let them know that those grades will be sent officially soon, but you just wanted to highlight 1 or 2 that you are particularly proud of. I would also recommend at the end of that paragraph just connecting your academics back to their school. So maybe one reason why these stellar academics show what a great student you'll be on their campus. Now, body paragraph 3. This is where you're going to talk about extracurricular updates. What have you been up to since you applied? Now, some students will have some really impressive extracurricular updates. Maybe they've started a new club. Maybe they were recently selected as president of a club or captain of a team. Those are definitely things that should go here. But if you are a student who maybe doesn't have quite as many extracurricular updates, you should also talk about ways that you've continued excelling in your extracurriculars. And as always, the big buzzword that we're thinking about here is impact. How have you continued making an impact in the spaces that you occupy extracurricularly? Lastly, we've got one more paragraph to get through, guys, and that last paragraph is another connection point between you and the school. This is often your last touch point between you and the admissions officer before your final decisions will come out. So in that paragraph, you just want to remind them why you would be such a great fit for their school. And what you don't want to do here is you don't want to take for granted that they remember your application file. A lot of students will say, oh, but I don't want to be repetitive, or I don't want to put this in again. Guys, they probably spent 3 to 4 minutes reading your application file. You should remind them why you think you're a great fit for their school. So 1 or 2 specifics. What are things that you're really excited to do on campus? Make them picture you there. The clearer they can see you on their campus, the more likely you are to get admitted. And then lastly, once you've done a nice little concluding paragraph reinforcing why you'd be such a great fit for their campus, just give them a nice little thank you note. Everyone likes to be appreciated, and these admissions officers are spending a lot of time on your applications. I know that deferrals can sometimes leave students feeling bitter. It happens to all of us. We're all human, but you just really want positivity and gratitude coming through in this letter. So drop them a nice thank you for their consideration of your application. So just to recap, guys, in this video, we talked about continued interest letters, what exactly they are, how exactly to write one, and when exactly you should send them out. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. We love answering your questions about the college process, and of course, everything can get a little bit more specific student to student, so we will always do our best to help if you just leave us a comment. Please like, subscribe to our channel. We have so much helpful content coming your way, and you don't want to miss a thing. And we can't wait to see you back here soon on Lotus Premier Education. Bye, guys.